Welcome back to Click Revision. In this video, we'll continue to look at each of the characters in An Inspector Calls, this time focusing on Eric Birling. We'll look at how he's described, his complex relationship with Daisy Renton, and his position in the Birling family both before and after the inspector's visit. According to the opening stage directions, Eric is in his early 20s, not quite at ease, half shy, half assertive. Which not only tells us he's the youngest member of the Birling family, but also that he hasn't quite grown into himself yet. He's half shy, half assertive, which means he isn't completely confident in himself. He's basically a bit immature, which is probably a result of him being rich and spoilt. In fact, Mr. Birling openly calls his son spoilt throughout the play, as though it's entirely his son's fault. Mr. Birling tells him he needs to brighten his ideas up and face a few responsibilities, which of course Eric will be forced to do by the end of the play and probably reacts to it a lot better than Mr. Birling does. He also says that Eric has an easier life than he did, and therefore has a lot more money to play with, and that his public school education has made life too easy for him. All of those things may be true, but that doesn't change the fact that Eric is in his 20s and his parents still treat him like a child. Mrs. Birling says he's only a boy, and even Sheila refers to him as poor Eric, as though she thinks he can't possibly take care of himself. As the youngest member of the family, Eric is used to being treated like he's the least important, and has spent the last 2 years idling his time by going out drinking, picking up girls, and generally spending far too much money enjoying himself. He's supposed to be learning the family business, but you get the impression that he isn't the hard-headed man of business his father is, and that his heart isn't really in it. The best description of Eric actually comes from Mrs. Birling, who calls him some drunken young idler, though she doesn't realise she's talking about her son at the time when she says it. Much of Eric's involvement in the early part of An Inspector Calls is designed to show the audience that he is a heavy drinker, despite his young age and the fact his parents either haven't noticed it or are in denial about it. His first line is a drunken laugh that interrupts the conversation and prompts Sheila to tell him, "You're squiffy," while his other contributions to the conversation involve making slightly drunken digs at other people. Here, the stage directions highlight how his comment is just a little bit inappropriate, and his engagement toast isn't entirely sincere either. "All the best. She's got a nasty temper sometimes, but she's not bad really. Good old Sheila." The stage direction here, rather noisily, clearly shows him to be someone who's just slightly out of control. In contrast to his parents, Eric cares very little for social grace and respectability. In fact, you could say he's grown up with it forced down his throat so much that he's trying to reject his upper-class roots entirely. He is happy to interrupt his father's big speech with the subject of war, and tells Mr. Birling that he has piled it on a bit tonight, by which he means that he's bored everyone by being too serious and formal. Meanwhile, his call of "steady the buffs" when Sheila and Gerald kiss can be seen as the 1912 equivalent of someone shouting, "Get a room!" which clearly isn't appropriate given the situation. He also comes very close to saying something that will give away his secret when the conversation turns to women and he says, "Yes, I remember." He stops himself before he can give away any more, but the implication is clear that he is referring to his affair with Eva Smith here. Eric is shocked by the suicide, but feels detached from the story of her death because he didn't know the girl. So his sense of empathy isn't great, but he still sees the injustice in her being sacked from Birling and Company, so he does have some sort of social conscience. He stands up to his father in conversation, replying to Birling's remark that it's a free country with, "It isn't if you can't go and work somewhere else." He also says that Birling could have kept her on instead of throwing her out, and asks the question, why shouldn't the girls who work at the plant try for higher wages? He believes Eva Smith should have been kept on in her job, and clearly has more of a socialist side than his father because he supports Eva Smith's spirit and thinks that workers should be treated in some way better than slaves. It's also worth noting that he makes all of these comments before he even knows that Eva Smith is the same girl that he knew over a year later. So how exactly did Eric know the dead girl? Eric met Daisy Renton in November of 1911. That's several months before the play takes place, and they met in the same bar where she met Gerald. They sleep together once, and Eric is so drunk he can't remember anything about her. 2 weeks later, he bumps into her again, and they sleep together once more. They meet a couple more times, and at some point, probably around the end of the year, Daisy announces that she's pregnant. Eric then steals £50 from work to give to her. Daisy refuses to take any more stolen money and tells Eric she doesn't want to see him anymore. By this time, it's well into 1912, and Daisy already has her appointment to see the Brumley Women's Charity Organisation. That's all fairly straightforward. However, Eric's relationship with Eva Smith or Daisy Renton presents something of a problem to modern audiences simply because of the way the relationship between men and women has changed since 1912, or even 1945 when An Inspector Calls was first performed. Let's have a look at the section of the play that deals with Eric and Daisy Renton meeting for the first time. Eric admits that he insisted Daisy let him in her house, even though she didn't want to. He also says that he threatened to make a row, meaning he bullied his way in forcefully, and she let him in just so he wouldn't turn nasty. As the inspector tells him, he just used her for the end of a stupid drunken evening as if she was an animal, a thing, not a person. In the 21st century, it is very easy to recognise Eric's behaviour as sexual assault or even rape. However, this aspect of the narrative is barely mentioned in the play, so it's difficult to know what really happened and how harshly to judge Eric for it. Eric, for his part, doesn't remember any more than that about their first night together, because he was too drunk. And she was drunk too, so his very vague memories are all we have to go on. Is Eric a violent person? Well, we know he'll steal from work, so he's definitely capable of criminal activity, and he certainly looks close to attacking his mother later on. However, it's possible that Eric's behaviour on that night was more of a spoilt tantrum than it was a violent threat. He even complains, "In a way, she treated me as if I were a kid, though I was nearly as old as she was." So Daisy clearly recognised his immature side, and that doesn't sound like she lived in fear of Eric. Ultimately, it's up to you to decide how you judge Eric for his actions. And how you answer that question yourself will probably have a very strong effect on how you answer the question of which Birling is most to blame for her death. Eric is the last of the Birlings to be questioned by the inspector, but not the last to see her alive. Mrs. Birling is questioned first, which is the reason Eric's secret has already been discovered by his family when he returns to the house. He walks into the news that his mother has blamed him entirely for the girl's death and that his sisters told everyone that he drinks too much. Bearing in mind he's already found out tonight that his ex-girlfriend and child are both dead, naturally his first reaction is to have a drink. This long stage direction is quite important, because as Eric pours himself a drink, it's like his family, especially his mother and father, are seeing him for the first time. J.B. Priestley makes it clear to the audience that Eric is a drinker from the very start of the play, but neither Mr. or Mrs. Birling have believed it, or that the inspector's story could be true until this moment. He has even admitted to drinking too much already that evening. By this point, Eric has absolutely nothing to lose by coming clean because his family and the inspector already know most of the details. His version of events suggests someone who is reckless and naive, who is completely out of his depth, and who acts in childish, desperate ways to try and fix the situation. For example, look at how he describes being told about the baby. "And the next time, or the time after that, she told me she thought she was going to have a baby. She wasn't quite sure, and then she was." This clearly isn't the voice of someone who took control of the situation. He doesn't even sound too sure of how a baby's made in the first place. However, Eric is well educated enough to know what his duty is here, which is of course to marry Eva Smith. And here he did try to do the right thing, but she didn't want to marry him. As he recalls it, she said I didn't love her and all that. And the all that bit really sounds like someone describing love without ever having felt it before, like it's an alien concept, so we really get a good impression of how lost he felt. Finally, in desperation, and unable to think of anything else to do, Eric steals £50 from work. Now, because £50 doesn't sound like a lot these days, you might picture him taking a few banknotes out of a safe and putting them in his pocket. But that £50 in 1912 is actually the equivalent of over £5,000 in today's money, and Eric's money-stealing scheme was a lot more complicated than simply taking the cash in one bundle. It involved taking payments from multiple clients, pocketing the cash, and then covering up the paperwork later. So let's be clear that Eric was very much on a losing path here. When asked how he was going to pay back the money, he replies, "I'd have managed somehow," making it clear that he had no plan at all. It's highly likely that had Daisy not broken off the relationship and refused any more money, that Eric would have continued to steal himself into an even bigger hole. However, despite being a thief, Eric definitely shows himself to have a sense of right and wrong. When he discovers Mrs. Birling turned Eva Smith away from her charity, he is so upset by the injustice that he almost snaps and attacks his mother, blaming her for everything. Look how everyone is reacting here. Eric is nearly at breaking point. Mrs. Birling is very distressed. Sheila is frightened. Mr. Birling is furious and intervening, which means he's throwing himself between Eric and his wife. Eric is absolutely furious at his mother, and there's definitely a threat there before the inspector diffuses the situation by shouting "stop." Ultimately, Eric is not an entirely unsympathetic character, and while he blames his mother for the death, he still blames himself for his actions. Like Sheila, Eric is completely remorseful, and is far more interested in the fate of Eva Smith and his child than the money or any criminal charge he may have to face in the future. He says, "The money's not the important thing. It's what happened to the girl, and what we all did to her that matters, and I still feel the same about it." Even when his parents and Gerald have settled on the idea that the inspector is a fraud, and that no girl has killed herself after all, Eric is unconvinced. He tells them, "Whoever that chap was, the fact remains that I did what I did, and Mother did what she did, and the rest of you did what you did to her. It's all the same rotten story whether it's been told to a police inspector or somebody else." And he tells his parents he's ashamed of both of them for their behaviour. He feels responsible for his actions regardless of whether he's going to get in trouble or not, and he doesn't like the way his parents quickly try to forget it ever happened. He says, "You lot may be letting yourselves out nicely, but I can't. Nor can Mother. We did her in all right." This is an important point to make, because it's clear that J.B. Priestley blames much of Eric's behaviour on his upbringing. Eric tells Mr. Birling that he didn't ask for help before stealing the money because you're not the kind of father a chap could go to when he's in trouble. And this makes sense, because to Priestley, Eric represents the children of the rich, who don't have to work for anything and can't apply themselves even when it's handed to them on a plate. Directionless, he ambles through life, unable to find his place, and without a role model he respects enough to ask for help, he is destined to make the same poor choices over and over again. That's all on Eric Birling for now. Thanks for watching. Our next video will focus on Inspector Goole, but we'd recommend attempting to write a few sentences in answer to each of these questions before moving on. Question 1. What took place between Eric and Eva Smith or Daisy Renton? Try to answer clearly and in chronological order. Question 2. How would you describe Eric's actions towards Eva Smith? Choose 5 words or phrases that you think sum up his behaviour, and write a sentence or 2 explaining why you think each description is appropriate. Question 3. How does J.B. Priestley want the audience to feel towards Eric? Try to back up your ideas with evidence from the text.